Hey everyone, welcome to What About Grief? I'm Larry Holm. I've really been looking forward to interviewing this month's guest, Morgan Pressel, because she is not only a coworker, but a friend. If you are a golf fan, you might remember back in 2001 when Morgan, as a 12-year-old, became the youngest player ever at that time to qualify for the U.S. Women's Open. Amazing. In 2005, she captured the U.S. Women's Amateur Championship. And 2 years later, Morgan won for the first time on the LPGA Tour. It just happened to be a major, the Chevron Championship. Morgan is a six-time member of the United States Solheim Cup teams, and in a couple weeks of this recording, she will be a co-captain on the 2023 U.S. Solheim Cup team playing in Spain. But now Morgan picks up a microphone and plays a crucial role as a lead analyst for the Golf Channel and NBC Sports coverage of the LPGA, and even more recently during early coverage of the men's U.S. Open. But through titles, trophies, and wins, and playing at the highest level in women's golf, despite all of that success, Morgan has had to deal with the loss of her mom, Catherine, and the subsequent grief from that, and moving forward. Back in April, when Morgan and I were in Los Angeles for work, we had dinner one night, and we began talking about grief and shared some thoughts on this uncontrollable emotion. After our conversation, I thought that if I did finally jump into the podcast world, I wanted her to be a guest and share her story about losing her mom to breast cancer and how she has coped with her grief. So, let's get going. Morgan Pressel, welcome.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for finding some time. I know you're very busy, and I do want to let the listeners know that if Morgan ever invites you out for dinner, say yes, because she knows all the great spots on the LPGA Tour in each city, and she makes a reservation like a month ahead, so you're guaranteed a great dinner. So that might be a podcast for you, Morgan and her restaurants. But thank you.
That's funny. It is one of my favorite things to do in traveling. You know, when you spend your life on the road, you got to find some fun things like that.
Yep, and you're very good at it. So, all right, so let's dive in here. I like starting out by getting to know a little bit about the loved one who is the reason why we have our grief. And so, if you can, paint a picture of your mom, Catherine, for us.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start back with the fact that, my mother passed away when I was 15 years old. So what I really know and remember about my mother is as a teenager and even younger than that. And actually this past Monday, September 4th, it's been 20 years. So it's quite crazy to be even on this podcast at this time, just kind of even going through my own different emotions through the 20-year anniversary of her passing. And my mom, she was a really dedicated woman to her family, to her business, to her job, to certainly us kids. She was tough. She expected, the very best of us always and encouraged us to always put our best foot forward. But again, that being said, from about the time I was 10 on, she was fighting breast cancer more or less for the rest of her life. And so I would say, unfortunately, a lot of my memories of her are when she was battling breast cancer, or, I remember very vividly when she had a mastectomy and had to wear a wig and then hated wearing a wig and just wore hats everywhere or scarves. And, so those, unfortunately, but still very powerful memories of my mother, or the most powerful memories that I have of my mother. And honestly, the silver lining in that is her courage through all of that. And, she never wanted anybody to feel bad for her or, didn't loathe in any kind of self-pity or anything like that. She still continued about her business as much as she could, even through chemotherapy treatments, and still always putting family first. And, so even though it was a little bit different for me and for us as in what it means to have a mother, it's still really just life lessons in how to handle really difficult situations and just how to continue to proceed with life no matter what it throws at you.
Yeah. And as you said, you were 10 years old when your mom was diagnosed. She was 39. Can you explain, can you break down the moment you heard the news of her diagnosis? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I remember it pretty vividly. There's a lot that I don't remember.
Sure.
There's a lot that's certainly kind of a little bit fuzzy or blurry in those times. But I do very vividly remember, I remember the kitchen table. I remember the green chairs that we were sitting in. And my sister, at the time, let's see, if I was 10, my sister was 7, my brother was 5. And we kind of all sat down around the table. My mom and dad said, we need to talk. And that was kind of unusual. So, of course, immediately kind of like, what is wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, my dad, I remember saying, your mom is sick. And, as kids, we're kind of like, well, okay, she'll get better.
Right.
Sick means
the flu.
You have a cold and you're struggling for a few days and then you'll bounce right back up on your feet. And I don't know quite how long it took to really settle in that it wasn't just some kind of a fleeting virus, but really, something truly life-changing. And especially, I would say even more so for my younger siblings.
Yeah. What were I remember when the doctor told Sarah and I was kind of in shock, that Sarah had stage 4 cancer all of a sudden. And, my emotions were, how is this happening? How are we just discovering this now? You're 10 years old. I can only imagine kind of what your immediate thoughts and emotions were. Probably cancer wasn't something you thought about a whole lot or maybe even knew a whole lot about as a 10-year-old.
Yeah, I would say, maybe cancer is something that you hear older people have. And, later in life. But, my mom was young. She was fit. She was an athlete. She was a tennis player. You would have never looked at her and said she looks sick, at least not at that point. And so I don't think any of us really understood what that meant to have cancer, what even cancer was.
Right.
I mean, what 10-year-old really has a deep understanding of how cancer can take over a person's body? So I don't know. I think it was more confusion than anything. I didn't have the understanding of an adult who has maybe seen other people kind of go through that. I think it was more confusion than anything. What does this really mean? Yeah. She's sick. And so that was probably the biggest kind of memory that I have of my emotions at that time.
Yeah. Did you play a role in her treatment? Would you go to chemo with her? Would you keep her company? Would you try to cheer her up? What kind of interaction did you have with her once she was diagnosed? Did that change a whole lot?
No, it didn't really change a whole lot. I mean, we were certainly always there and around, and I think she found a lot of joy in her children. And even though we were probably pretty tough, but I think that I don't want to say she tried to hide it as much from us, but she tried to be strong and show a strong front and maybe not wanting to expose us to everything that does go along with cancer treatments. And of course, I remember her losing her hair and probably having to explain to us why she was going to lose her hair and, the medication that she was taking. But yeah, I think she was just always trying to be really strong for us and not act or appear sick and not probably to try not to frighten us.
Yeah.
If I really think about it and I put myself in her shoes, try not to scare us. I don't think she wanted to be scared. I mean, I do remember, we'd be back in her bathroom and she'd be getting dressed and putting on her wig or, the special bra that she had to have because of her mastectomy and things like that. And I remember her showing me those kinds of things, but I don't really remember her ever otherwise showing us much in the way of, fighting cancer, at least not really the first time around. And I do remember it was very different then. This is 25 years ago at this point, and she had to drive all over town for different doctor's appointments. So I do remember that. And now a lot of what we have here is certainly centered around how do we make it easier for the patient? How do we have all the doctors in one place? How do we, it's hard enough to go through breast cancer without having to drive all over South Florida to different specialists and doctors and things like that, which I do remember her doing.
Yeah.
But I really just think she tried to pretend as much as she could for us that nothing was wrong.
She did the mom thing by hiding the ugliness and the hell that she was going through to her 3 kids, sounds like.
Yeah, if I put myself in her shoes, that's kind of now looking back what I would assume she was thinking.
Yeah. Did she participate in coming to the tournaments? Would she encourage you as you're walking 18 holes? Was there that interaction from her to you during those times?
Oh, always.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime that she had the opportunity to come out and watch, even when she was quite sick, she did her very best to be there. I remember one day, it was I think a January day. It was one of the coldest days on record, like the kind of day that there's a headline in the local paper about how cold it is here in Florida.
Yeah.
Granted,
it's all
relative.
relevant.
It's Florida.
It was 75 and
Chicago.
sunny.
It's all relative. But no, it was cold. It was in the 30s, and I was playing in, I believe it was the Doherty, and she came out to watch, and she was all bundled up and like scarves almost even around her face, like covering her cheeks, and really trying to stay warm. And her picture ended up being the next day on the cover of the Sun Sentinel, which was quite funny. We got a good chuckle out of that. But, part of it was certainly because of the treatment. And she was very, very cold, but she still came out to support me. And I remember her, you mentioned earlier, playing in the Women's Open when I was 12. She was there. She came to North Carolina to watch me play, and it was awesome.
Yeah, that's really neat. What were the kind of the last few days or hours like before your mother passed? Were you able to say goodbye to her, or was she so far down the line on medication that she wasn't aware? What was that last kind of moment with her like for you?
Yeah, she was, what I remember was that she was definitely still there. And I was leaving for school. I don't remember what day of the week it was, but one morning, and I want to say it was like a Thursday. And she had been deteriorating. We had hospice at home, so I remember she was in a hospital bed in her bedroom, and I was actually supposed to be leaving that afternoon for the Junior Solheim Cup in Sweden.
Yeah.
So I had said goodbye that morning going to school. I was going to be picked up from school and taken to the airport. And I I remember my grandfather came and he picked me up and he said, your mother's taken a turn for the worse. You're not leaving today. And I remember in those moments just being upset, probably upset with the whole world,
right,
to be honest, if I had to think about it. But, I loved everything about the Solheim Cup. I wanted desperately to kind of escape what was happening. So I think I was somewhat looking forward to going and kind of getting away from everything that was happening in my life at the time. Granted, not maybe, I guess, the thoughts of a 15-year-old, right?
Yeah.
Like, I just need to get out of here. I want to go. I need to, just kind of leave. And of course, it was the right thing to not go. But I remember my grandparents asked me if I wanted to go and say goodbye again. I said no. Like, I remember that very vividly.
Because it would be too hard and bring back what you had just done.
It was already hard enough leaving that morning, and I felt like I had said goodbye. And even still, I see how I'm going to say this. I try my hardest to not remember her that way.
Right. Yeah.
Because she's so much more than that.
Yeah. So your mom has passed. You're a young teenager. You're involved in golf. You're going to school. When did grief come into your life? When did you become aware of it, and how did you cope with it?
Yeah, I would say I don't really have a lot of memories of the grief time, and maybe that is me trying to block it out and kind of just shut down those immediate days following. I think I was probably very numb to what was going on and tried to, I'm kind of I like to be a busy person, and I'm sure that I really focused on school and on golf as ways to distract myself. And very close with my family, my aunts and my uncle and my grandparents, of course, but they're also, at the same time, were grieving the loss of their sister and their child. And I think it was all of it was, and maybe part of it was what we also learned from my mother was kind of don't show it. Don't show that, you're really going through these tough times. And I know that's kind of a part of the reason why you wanted to start this podcast when we talked, Larry, was because people don't really talk about it. And, I never, went and got any professional help of any kind. I would say I kind of put my blinders on, and I felt that the best way that I could honor my mother was to make her proud and to, get the best grades I could and work as hard as possible in school. She was always very, very passionate and strong about, trying your absolute hardest, give 120%. Every time. Those were kind of some of the things that she definitely instilled in us. And, bad grades were not acceptable and those sorts of things. And so I think I kind of really leaned even harder into some of that as a bit of a distraction and a bit of, this is what she would want me to do.
Yeah. So you're 15 years old. You've bottled up your emotions. You're not grieving. And now all these years later, have you kind of given yourself permission to grieve openly and honestly, or are you still somewhat closed up when it comes to grief and dealing with your mom's passing?
I would say it's a very good question because I don't know the answer. And I don't know what, I guess, dealing with grief looks like. And I think it looks different for everybody. And
Definitely.
I kind of, when I think about it, I think about that I have tried to grieve by doing, in the sense of starting a foundation and trying to raise money to help others battling breast cancer. And I truly think in at its core, that's a way, and my grandfather helped me create that. So I think between the two of us, that was our way of grieving, is we can't just sit around and, feel sorry for ourselves. Why did this happen to me? Granted, I've had many of those thoughts in my life. Why her? Why so young? All of those questions have, come in and out so many times. But, I think we kind of looked at it and said, okay, we can't change the past, but what can we really do about the future? And, I do say this a lot too, that I feel like whether she had survived breast cancer or not, I think I still would have been inclined to do this and fortunately have an amazing platform in the game of golf and wonderful friends around me, certainly here in Boca Raton, who helped me kick it all off and that kind of thing. But I think I would have still been inclined to do it and tried to make a difference. And then she would have been working right alongside me the whole way. And she would have been very passionate about it as well.
Sounds like it, yeah. So your way to react to grief was to stay busy. Obviously, you started to play golf at the highest level. You're traveling all over the United States, all over the world. But sometimes when you're inside the ropes playing, did grief ever enter into your mind, or did you ever kind of look up at the green and wish your mom was there? Or because, as you know, far better than me, golf, you have to stay so focused and in the moment, and grief can just show up at any moment. And I'm wondering if that happened while you were playing and how you dealt with it and kind of got back then out of your mind to get focused back on golf.
Yeah, it may have happened more so, especially at the beginning, but I do remember that golf and being, inside the ropes, so to speak, was kind of that escape, the opportunity for me to think about something else and focus on something else. And yes, there is a lot of time, as we know, through a round of golf where your mind can certainly wander. But I would say it was mostly, for me, especially as time went on, it was really the bigger moments where it would kind of come in and out, and I would wish she was there or wish I could share it with her, or especially any kind of a big win, but also in a tough time, in a struggling time.
That's when moms really turn it on.
Yeah, exactly.
So kind of knowing what you know now, and what would you say to someone? What advice would you give? Maybe another teenager who's 10 or 11 who might have lost one of their parents, who might be going through something similar. What advice would you give a young person who lost a parent?
Gosh, I mean, I feel like everybody goes through it so differently. And, even my brother, sister, and I all had kind of different reactions and our own different challenges with grief. And, I think some of that might be up to another parent or, parental style figure to, make sure that the child feels like they have somebody to talk to and a place where they feel like they can open up and that it's okay to be sad and that it's hard and it's not something that is probably ever going to change. You just maybe, time certainly, time helps everything in that sense, but it's still always there. It's just not, it's just not as constant, I think, as time goes on.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important. And I'd say I maybe wish that I had had somebody, because like I said earlier, the whole family is grieving. I remember, even my grandmother for years, we'd go to a breast cancer event and, ask the survivors would all stand and my grandmother would kind of be upset. She hated that word survivor, still does, because her daughter didn't survive.
Yeah.
And so when an entire family unit like that is grieving, it's really important. And I know that, I listened to the first episode and I know that you found a lot of peace in the group that you have joined and been a part of with other people. I remember you said there are people that I don't know, that I've never known. I would have never known.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of all going through something similar yet different together. And it's very powerful when you feel like you're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how many people, and listen, I'm just a small little podcast, but how many people have sent me messages via social media or have come up to me in a TV compound and just talked about their grief. And you just never know what people are going through and what you're doing, which I'm going to get into here in a moment. But, most people, all your friends and fellow players know about your mom, and now people know obviously about Sarah passing, and I'm trying to get the word out about this grief podcast. But people need to talk about it and find somebody who can help them to move forward and just be an ear and just be present in their life.
Yeah, and I would say that I still struggle to talk about it. I've made it this far in the recording with only tearing up kind of once. It's like a big coup for me. And certainly with my platform and my foundation, I talk a lot about my mother, and it's hard. Sometimes just in writing a speech or some notes down, I'll just cry.
Yeah.
And sometimes I struggle to get through a speech, and that's okay.
Shows you love her.
I try not to. Well, I'd say I would say yes and no. I would say you don't have to necessarily cry to show that you love somebody.
True.
So I don't want people to think that just crying is the answer. But I've always been a crier, so that's kind of just my, I guess, little bit of an outlet for maybe emotions that I haven't talked about enough.
Right. Well, let's talk about the Morgan Pressel Foundation. How did that all come about?
Well, I think it really came about through grief. My grandfather and I kind of being like, okay, what can we do? She was treated at a lot of different areas, as I mentioned before, here in Boca Raton. And, went to the main hospital where she was treated, it was Boca Community Hospital at the time, now Boca Raton Regional Hospital. And kind of what can we do? How can we work to help patients going through breast cancer. And I'm very lucky. This area, this community where I live is extremely philanthropic. So many members here at St. Andrew's Country Club especially have their own passions and their own events and things that they raise money for and are just so incredibly giving and philanthropic. And quite a few of my friends, people who certainly knew my mother, kind of got around and said, hey, we'd love to help you. Let's have a golf tournament. That seems like certainly a natural fit as a golfer.
Sure.
And so it was really with some people who had tremendous experience in fundraising and wanting to really make a difference in the battle against breast cancer here specifically, locally, to give back to the places where my mother was treated. We had no idea really what would happen or how much money we would raise or anything like that. And I think in our very first year, we were close to, if not at, about $500,000.
Wow.
And it was just like so blown away. And it's just kind of grown from there. We're getting ready for a 17th event in January. And it's been an amazing ride. We have, like I said, just so many truly kind, philanthropic, caring people who want to be involved. And some still remember my mother when, she was alive, and some new friends and faces who just really want to give back and support. And it just has continued to grow. We have a couple of other events. We have an event as well at Banya Golf Club that has been consistently growing over the years. And that's just a lot of fun. And an event actually next week from this recording at Woodmont in Maryland. So we just continue to try to grow and give back to the different communities. The Woodmont event is centered around the Georgetown Hospital group and their fight against breast cancer a little bit differently than what we do down here in Boca Raton, but still, really wanting to make an impact wherever we can.
Yeah. And I've read over $11 million has been raised so far over all these years. So congratulations, and hopefully more to come with all of these events. You have your foundation, you have these tournaments. What was really cool is this Mammo van that you guys have, and it's a state-of-the-art bus that travels around Florida, and there's a picture of your mom on one side and a picture of you, I think, on the other side. And tell us a little bit about that. It travels around, and women can go in for is it a free screening to find out if they have cancer or not? Breast cancer specifically?
Yeah, so I'll start from the beginning. So when we were kind of looking for a specific project to fund and partner with the hospital on, they had come to us and said, these are some of the ideas that we have. These are kind of some of the needs that or like to have with here in our community in this hospital. And, the board members and I who were in that meeting, the Mamma van was there and it jumped off the page. Like that was the thing. That was the tangible piece of equipment that was going to make its way around South Florida, make mammograms accessible, not intimidating, but still be the same state-of-the-art 3D mammography that you would get if you had gone into the hospital. I think sometimes people have this preconceived notion that it's in a van, it's not in the hospital, it's not the same. No, it's exactly the same. It's the same technicians, the same radiologists that would read the scans.
Wow.
And then any follow-up, should there be any, would be at Boca Raton Regional Hospital. But that's really our pride and joy, something that we're very, very proud of. Sometimes I drive by it on the highway, which is kind of wild.
Have you driven it?
It's off. I have not driven it. I don't know if you need a special type of license to drive. I mean, it's a huge, huge piece of equipment, and but I've been in it many times, and it's very cool. And it goes to schools, to business offices, to shopping centers, to all sorts of different types of areas related to income and socioeconomic status. And for the most part, yearly mammograms are covered by insurance. So that is how most of the mammograms are paid for. But those who are not insured, nobody's turned away. We have a separate fund that works to help those people who might not have health insurance to get through the system as well. That's very important to us.
That's awesome.
We don't want anybody to be turned away just because of finances. And I'd say even that alone really does scare some people from finding out. But people are afraid to sometimes know bad news. They don't want to get bad news, so they delay, especially something as routine as a mammogram. And we want to make it as easy as possible. I know that there are teachers, especially here in South Florida, who depend on the Mammovans visit every year for their yearly screening. And so those kinds of things we're very proud of. And we also have a Center for Cancer Genetics. And again, it's kind of in that same vein of early detection, which is really important to us because, still, the earlier you can catch breast cancer, the more treatable it is. It's quite treatable if it's caught at an early stage. And that's really our biggest message. And imagine finding out that you have a BRCA mutation and you are more at risk to getting breast cancer or ovarian cancer. And you know that, and you have that knowledge. And now you can be even more vigilant than maybe the normal or average person would be without the BRCA mutation. And with the Center for Cancer Genetics too, it's we can kind of reach a little bit outside of cancer genetics and, breast cancer. And we can test for over 40 different types of cancers as well.
Wow.
So it's even broader than the scope of, and they're constantly finding new mutations or interesting family lineages where maybe they're not all the same type of cancer or the same type of disease, but how are they linked genetically? And there's constant research happening to try and kind of figure out some of those links where you kind of look at a whole family tree and you say, something is up here, but we can't put our finger on it. What might it be? And, so they're constantly kind of looking at that and trying to help families who do have different types of mutations, genetic mutations, just stay really on top of their health.
That's really neat. My goal with the podcast is if I can help one person with their grief, this is all worth it. With the Mammovan, I got to believe there are some incredible stories of people you have helped. They might have been scared to go in and they decided to do it. And, they might have found out that they have breast cancer, but maybe it was detected early and you've saved lives. And I got to believe that's so fulfilling for you.
Yeah, just like you said in the podcast, if you can help one person, if we help one person, one family, certainly we'd love to help more, but one person, think about how life-changing that could be for one young family. But certainly, we've had thousands and thousands of women go be screened on the van So many people have gone through our Center for Cancer Genetics. And I have one really vivid story that was something that I hadn't even really thought about related to the van. I thought about the van just being convenient and easy and not as intimidating as walking in the front door of a hospital, which can at times be scary and somewhat depressing. And nobody really likes to go to the hospital.
No.
And especially for people like you and me who have very negative past history related to hospitals, it's even harder.
Yeah.
And so I was at this one event that I was doing at a local Panera Bread here, and it was in October. It was a breast cancer type of an event. And I remember I was in the back making like pink ribbon bagels that they were doing. And it was really cool. The Mama van was parked out front. And I ended up going outside and doing some promo photos in front of the van. And this woman is walking through the parking lot towards the van, and she's in tears. And she was the lady working at the cash register. They were trying to teach me how to use the cash register, which I remember that. And she had two of her fellow employees on her arm, and she was just absolutely in tears. And I at first couldn't figure out what was going on, but what had happened was because that van was out front, a conversation started amongst especially the female employees. When was your last mammogram? Have you gotten it done? And it became clear to her fellow coworkers that this woman was 53 years old and had never gotten a mammogram.
Wow.
Because she was frightened, because she was scared. And they walked out with her to get her first ever mammogram at 53 years old. And of course, I don't know whatever happened from that scan, but all I can say is that kind of positive peer pressure maybe got her over her fear of getting a mammogram. And maybe now she is going to say, you know what, I really should stay on top of this and be more proactive on this and get it done every year and not be scared of the results. And, that's kind of really certainly was my hope for that situation. And even, still that's one of my biggest messages. Not everybody has access to even a mama van. Our mama van only stays in South Florida, but the more, I can share knowledge is your health. Like that really is, you'd rather know than know too late. And the more you can do to stay on top of it. I also feel like specifically related to all kinds of medical tests and exams that people, should really stay on top of. I feel like people got scared and put a lot of it off during COVID. So even, now post-COVID, trying to really encourage people to go back to their pre-COVID routines of staying on top of their health. And, that I would say those kinds of screenings really took a dip during that time because people were scared to go anywhere. And, certainly starting to see those numbers come back up.
Yeah. And let's not forget, next month, October, is Breast Awareness Month. So I'm sure the van will be busy, hopefully, with women coming in.
Yeah, it's actually, it's so busy. We are getting a second one.
Oh, awesome.
It's always on the road. So that's kind of been our big push over the last year 2 years, I guess, is to really to put a new mama van on the road. So hopefully it should be very soon.
That's great.
Should see another one.
That's great. I know your time is really busy, so let's just wrap up here. I've got 2 quick questions for you. How can listeners get involved and learn more about your foundation and the golf tournament and all of that?
Yeah. Thank you. Anytime anybody who'd certainly like to get involved can go to our website, morganpresselfoundation.org. And I mean, the best way really to get involved is to truly stay on top of your own health and encourage the other people in your life to do the same. That really at the heart is our mission. And, we'll certainly continue to raise as much money as we possibly can and continue to spread our impact as far and wide as we can. But, if anybody at home, think about when the last time you had your mammogram was. And if it's been over a year, maybe call up and schedule that appointment.
Yeah, definitely do it. And lastly, for me, it's been 2 years since Sarah's passing, and I struggle every year on how to remember that day. You're 20 years in now. How do you spend that day, and how do you remember her on that day? Do you do anything different, or how do you recognize her on that day?
Yeah, I don't really have a good answer for that. I don't really do anything special. I'd say that, and maybe I really do a lot more of that through the events that I have. Mm-hmm. But I definitely, check in with my siblings, my family, see how they're all doing. And we certainly acknowledge it and, light a yahrzeit candle and those kinds of things. But I've never, and this is where we go back to talking about people grieve in different ways. I am not a person who likes to go to the cemetery. Like some people love to do that and they feel connected and close going to the cemetery. I have been the opposite. I have been to the cemetery on the day of your funeral, the day of her unveiling, and then just a few months ago on my grandfather's passing, because he was buried right close to where she is. Actually, and one other time when my father passed as well. Other than that, that's not, it's too sad for me to go there. Yeah. But my brother loves to do it. My sister does it on occasion. And so that's where, everybody grieves differently and there's no right or wrong way. But, that's just, I don't know why. I've never really, I feel more uncomfortable when I go to the cemetery than anything. Yeah. Well, Morgan, thank you. I really do appreciate you taking time and coming on this podcast and talking about grief, which is a subject that, has been hard for you to talk about or just haven't really had the chance to maybe talk about it. And what you are doing is so important, and your foundation is doing life-saving work about the awareness and the fight against breast cancer. So, on behalf of all of us and all of those people who are battling this disease or have lost someone to cancer, I think we've all gained a lot of knowledge from your story, and thank you again for being a guest. Well, thanks, Larry, and thanks for giving me the platform to share it, to talk about some things that I've really never really spoken about, some of it very publicly. And thank you for, I do remember back to our dinner in LA when we were talking about, maybe starting this podcast. And, congratulations to you, and think about all the people around the world who are finding inspiration and a way to deal with and sit with their grief. And it's really special what you're doing. Well, thank you. I look forward to our next dinner. Absolutely. Can't wait to find out where you're going to take me. Have a great time in Spain with the Solheim Cup, and go Team USA. No, thanks, Larry. All right. Take care. Thank you, Morgan. My thanks to Morgan Pressel. What About Grief is available monthly on all major podcast listening platforms. Please follow the podcast, as well as rate and review the show on Apple Podcast. The executive producer of What About Grief is Marcia Anderson.
Logo artwork was designed by TED Studios. This episode was recorded at BAM Studios in Chicago. And lastly, feel free to email us at whataboutgriefpod@gmail.com.